Most people don't lose their wealth in markets. They lose it in courtrooms, hospital rooms, and probate. In this episode, I sit down with asset protection attorney and RIA Matt Meuli to unpack how fast your balance sheet can become a target in today's entitlement and envy-heavy culture. Why 60% of families or more are walking around with little to no estate plan that's current, and how simple structures like trusts, powers of attorney, and kids protection plans can be the difference between a smooth transition or a public disaster. We get into Wyoming self-settled trusts, what it really means to be judgment proof, why wills are basically a public roadmap for opportunistic attackers, and how to build a practical, multi-layered defense so that creditors, ex-spouses, and even sudden policy changes have to run through walls to reach your money. If you've built something worth protecting, or you have people that you advise, then this episode will change how you think about risk, legacy, and keeping what you have already earned. It's time to go to the atomic level.
It's time to go to the atomic level. It's time to go.
Welcome back to the Atomic Level, the show where we decode the matters of wealth, one insightful conversation at a time, so that you can grow and protect your net worth and your net happiness. I'm J Snook, and today I'm joined by my good friend Matt Meuli, yourtrustedplanner.com, Wyoming Asset Protection Attorney.com, and Meuli Law and Associates. So we'll get into a bunch of things, but Matt, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Chris. It's very nice to be here.
Yeah, awesome. I've been looking forward to this one because I've learned so much from you in the last little bit here that I felt like it would be great for us to just kind of continue that conversation just in front of a camera so that other people could learn from it. I start these always off with a little bit about like who they're listening to, where they came from, why they do what they do. So just kind of go back as far as you can remember before you were the guy you are today, doing the things you're doing today, kind of talk a little bit about the backstory. Like, where did you come through? What was kind of your career path and your early days of hobbies or whatever that kind of led you into being both an RIA as well as a practicing attorney now for longer than Taylor Swift's been alive. So let's go with that.
Well, I appreciate that, but Taylor Swift's been around for a while, so it's kind of hard to remember back that far. But I do remember being in high school, and we had a business law class, and we had an instructor who liked to teach a class by having this setup where our grade was based on the points we made. So the points were like dollars and cents, if you will, and we could make more points if we sued other people. And if we found things, the class had a set of bylaws and laws that we lived by. And if someone didn't abide by that, you could actually sue them. And then you pay the attorney and you pay the jury, and kind of went through the whole law process. And I remember for that year that I took that class, for 3 of the quarters, I was voted the judge, where I would sit in there and end up getting a really good grade because it seems like the judge always got paid whether the plaintiff won or lost. So I thought that was pretty cool. Didn't really think about that was going to end up, being who I was later on. But during the time, it was really fun. I knew that I was going to do all right when the time that I wasn't a judge, the instructor pulled me aside and said, "Hey, I want you to litigate this classmate case because I think that everyone's going to learn a lot from it." So I went through the litigation phase and everything, and it was against him, the instructor, and he totally schooled me. I got lost all my points. But, again, he pulled me aside and said, "That was such a good learning lesson. Here, we'll reimburse you." So, I got to learn about law and government subsidies all at the same time.
Now, that was high school or that was college? That was high school.
That was high school. And everyone said, "Man, you should become a lawyer." And it was always like, no, I don't like lawyers. I don't like going to, fighting. I'm more of a lover than a fighter. I don't want to be a lawyer, and all that stuff, and all the lawyer jokes. I think they've been earned and all those things, so I don't want to be one of those. And so I fought it for a long time. But in college, I was actually in finance. That's what you have to say when you're in finance. When you're everybody else, you say finance, but if you're in the business, you say finance. Yeah. So I went through that and learned a lot about investing and things like that. And then when push came to shove, and I was up at the University of Wyoming, and Wyoming only has one school, so you really don't have a choice to go to a different school. So I was getting towards the end there, and I found out that I could go to law school. And so, yes, I'm a double cowboy. But I went to law school up there in Wyoming. I got in and really had a pretty good time and started understanding what the law business was all about.
It's actually a great law school. I don't know if we talked about this or not, but I actually was an adjunct professor for 2 years between 2022 and 23 at the business school at UYO, working with their blockchain and their digital center of excellence after they'd passed all the laws. Because as you know, but many people may or may not, Wyoming as a state between 2018 and I think present day, to my knowledge, passed over 22 kind of really forward-thinking, leading digital asset protection, IP, and banking law charters, and they were leading the nation at one point back in that time. And so I got exposed to the university, worked with some folks there. We did some hackathons there, and it's a great university. One of the things I learned that I didn't know was it's older than the state. The university was a land grant university, so it's actually before the state was even formed. I don't know exactly how that works, but
yeah, it's been around before the state was formed, and now they're beholden to state funding, which kind of frosted cookies, if you will. It was better having grants that ran all that thing, because you weren't beholden to the legislature. But they're a great school, and like you said, I actually was a musician at the time as well. I played in jazz bands and did a lot of that things. I still play. I play the trumpet.
Wow.
And play
so
it in
did you play the trumpet all through high school, and did you want to be a musician at any point, or was it always kind of more of a passion, hobby, side thing? I'm curious, because I was a drummer, and I would have never gone to college except for the fact that I could play football. And it's not because I'm a dumb guy. There was no reason for me that I could think why I needed to go to college if I wasn't going to play college football. And I wanted to be a drummer as a careerist at one point when I was 18. So did you kind of pause on music, or was it just something you always did as a side thing, and you knew you wanted to be a career in a different area?
Well, I always enjoyed music and whatnot, but when I became a finance major, it kind of showed me that I wasn't going to make a lot of money playing the horn, and because of that, I couldn't spend a lot of time at it. So I was more of a trumpet holder than a trumpet player. But that it was just a way to kind of pass the time. I mean, playing high notes on a trumpet is pretty equivalent to screaming in a closet. I mean, it really releases a lot of stress. So even today, I still play a little bit. I play semi-professionally. I actually get paid for playing, which is kind of cool.
What's that jazz club in Fort Collins called? The one that's like underneath the Armstrong. Is that still there? I haven't been there in a couple of years, but there used to be a jazz club like speakeasy kind of place right underneath the Armstrong Hotel.
The Sundowner there. It was what it was called. We met Tommy Castro when he came through. The band was there. But I was, in college, I played quite a bit as a finance major, and I actually went to law school. I started my law school on a marching band scholarship. So I don't know if they do that anymore, but at the time they let me do it. So I had some money to go to law school, and all I had to do was, get out on the football field and play horn every once in a while, which is not a crappy thing to do. You're playing your music and you're doing it in front of 40, 50, 60,000 people. So, that's always fun. Yeah, it was quite a difference though up there at 7,200 feet above sea level, because I think sometimes your lungs, you kind of shrink and things like that. That's why a lot of the athletes train up there, because it just makes you an animal. You hear about the Mile High in Denver, and when people come there, they have trouble with the altitude, and it's a thing. I remember when the football team or the basketball team would win, and we'd go to Seattle or down to San Diego to play in the bowl games or at the Sweet 16 or whatever. You'd walk down there and be like growing another lung. I mean, you could play so loud and so high for so long that the team never won.
I don't remember how well they were I wasn't a big basketball follower at the time, but when I was in graduate school, I did 2 master's degrees at San Diego State, but when I was in the first one between 2000, it was like 99 to 2001, it was when Steve Fisher became the coach of the Aztecs. That was like the year, one of those years was the year he became the coach. And so there was all this excitement because obviously the Fab Five and all that, and now he's coming to San Diego State. But I remember I was the mascot. I actually, funny enough, like similar thing. I paid for my MBA program in finance and at San Diego State by getting a scholarship to run around as what was Monty Montezuma at the time and blow the conch shell and scream at people in the stands. And so I got a weird scholarship too that covered my tuition and books, and I got to go to the sports games for free. But Wyoming would always kick our butt, and we weren't that great at that time, but in basketball they would come down and kill us. And it was always funny, but it makes sense because they were playing at sea level. They had 3 lungs for every player just running up and down the court.
Well, the football game, Chris, though, I wanted to tell you about down there when we got down there. Yeah, we were louder than the other band by a lot, but the football team had a little trouble there because we were actually, the Wyoming Cowboys were actually playing the Oklahoma State Cowboys. I can tell you right now that the Cowboys did win. I won't tell you which one, but they had this guy. So they sat us back on the field. So we were in the end zone, the band was, and we sat there and we actually got to watch field level everyone play. And there was this guy in the Oklahoma State team that was usually running a lot with nobody around him, usually by himself. And so that was, that was Barry Sanders.
Yeah, I was going to say, when I'm thinking about the era, because we're in this similar demographic, but you're a little bit older than me, and I'm thinking, was it Barry Sanders?
It was Barry Sanders. So Barry Sanders and I were in the same end zone on the field during a game together. So we'll just leave it at that.
That's funny. That is funny. Well, let's talk about, let's shift gears and talk about the career path. So you graduate. Now you have a law degree, you have a business degree, and you're in Wyoming, or were you living in Colorado then? Where did you kind of settle in as far as the career started? Where did that
Well, initially, since I was in Wyoming, I mean, it's really good to go to the state that you're going to try to spend some time in, because you make a lot of connections during law school and things like that. And I joined the Attorney General's office of Wyoming. I became the mineral tax attorney. So we would litigate against all the minerals. And up in Wyoming, that's a big thing because they don't have income tax. So one of the 3-legged stools of taxation was mineral tax. So it was real important, paid for a lot of people's salaries and things like that. So started out with them. Later on, I was representing the Wyoming Department of Revenue. They ended up hiring me over to be their state tax administrator, and also for their ad valorem and sales tax, so excise tax administrator. So all of a sudden, I had a big government job where I had a big budget and 38 employees, and needed to get them all working together and things like that. But it was an appointed position, appointed by the governor and things like that. And then there was a regime change in Wyoming. And so it's, oddly enough, if you can be appointed by a governor, you can be disappointed by the next one. And so again, the litigation was kind of burning me out and things like that. And litigating tax cases, 2 or more a week was pretty demanding and things like that. And so in between there, I decided I'd take a little stint at public defending, and I did that. And I looked at all these folks and they were like, dang, these kids are 18 and their lives are ruined because they got caught when they were 18 as an adult. Now they're going to spend a lot of time in jail. So I got this wild idea that if I wanted to really help these young men and women, I would talk to them before they went to jail. And so down in Colorado, they had a program where it allowed people who had a advanced degree or even a degree, they'd allow you to come down and get a teacher's license. And kind of abbreviated, where you only needed 11 months or so, including the student teaching, to get this teacher's license. So I went down to CSU, and I got I got a degree from Colorado State. Having a degree from Wyoming, now I didn't know who I cared about in the Wyoming Bowl or the border wars, because
Right. Now you're both sides of the equation, yeah.
But that's how I became a teacher for a while, and I decided, to try to help these young men and women from, change their life around before they went to prison, before their life got, altered in a way that we couldn't help. And it wasn't long doing that where the business degree started kicking in, and, there's these thoughts of, hey, maybe if I went back and I did law as a business, that I ran law like a business, and then, I could make more in a month than I make in a year as a teacher, maybe economics made sense to get back in the legal game, and that's when I went ahead and opened my own shingle down in Colorado, actually, and that was in 2013. I had to retake the bar because you know, I wasn't practicing right at the time when I took it. And so that was, I took the bar first in 1988, and I took the bar in 2008, almost 20 years to the day.
Wow.
Fortunate enough, and you know, had I guess God's help to pass that thing. Because during the bar examination, I was always wondering what I was doing, because all these young kids were in there with their big computers typing away, and I was just like, man, what am I doing? But fortunate enough to get through there and get the Colorado piece, and then I just immediately opened up my.
Is the bar one of those things? You know, I've so many friends that have taken the bar in different states, and you know, obviously it's like any other thing. You just probably want to wipe it from your memory once you have it. But since you actually did take it twice, do you have enough of memory? Was it fundamentally like different, or was it just as miserable and it was like, I don't know, because I wiped the 88 version out of my brain the minute I passed it? And like, I'm just curious how different it was. I would imagine it was.
There's some standard parts in the bar that makes them, you know, work across the United States, a lot of places, and you can wave in and out depending on how well you do. So there's a standard portion that's usually multiple choice, and it's pretty well designed to, you know, where you read 2.5 pages of small print, and then you have questions that are in Roman numerals, and there's 4 of them, and then the actual question says it's 1 only, or 1 and 2, or 1 and 2 and 3, but not 4, or 4 only. So it's really an exercise in how much can you process, how much can you read, and how much stress can you go through to get through that portion. But then there's a state portion, which are essays, where you usually write essays for 12 hours during the exam or so, and those are fundamentally different because they're they deal mainly with the law of the state that you're in. And
Right.
so some states you can take the overall portion that's the same, MBE they call it, and you can do all that, but then you need to take the essay portion in the state, you know, where you're going and doing that. And that's what was hard about Colorado, is actually getting through 12 hours of Colorado law essays without ever being in a Colorado court or you know.
Yeah, without having the context. So you have a Wyoming and a Colorado license, then, is that accurate?
I do.
Okay. So and you had to pass the bar in both, and then you have whatever CEUs or whatever they call them, the continuing ed things. You have to support that separately. Like, is it aggregate, or do you have to do different things for each one?
Well, now you're going to find it's hard to believe, but certain states do things differently, the same things differently. So there's not anything uniform there, but we call them, you know, the continuing education, CLEs, continuing legal education.
Right.
And Wyoming has them where you can take them. You need 15 hours a year to take those, and if you take more than that, they usually kind of bank those for you and everything like that. Where Colorado, you need 45 credits in a 3-year period, which if you do the math, it comes out the same, but you don't have to hit the 15 every year. But once that 3 years ends, you end up having to start over, wipes your slate clean. Because I always have a ton more than I need, and they always get wiped out after 3 years. But you keep those going, and then, you know, as doing the financial side and the RA things and the IAR things, investment advisor representative type of things, you have to take what they call the CE and keep those up as well. So there's a lot of continuing education that goes on with this little license that I get to hang on the wall.
So with all that being said, you know, when you started the practice again in 2013, as it kind of currently exists today, I want to get into the different things that you do, because you're very focused around, you know, life and legacy planning, asset protection, very kind of across the board, from, you know, a minimum net worth or family where you're just trying to make sure that you protect the house, have the kids, if they're minors, you know, in a situation where something bad's not going to happen to somebody else you don't want. If something happened raising your kids, you deal on that end, you know, on the like more mass level. And then you also have very unique, like, there's only a handful of people can even do it, because it's a small state. It's a unique thing, but delegated asset protection trust, the Wyoming Asset Protection Trust specifically, And that's a really, sophisticated but smart way to protect your assets and shield, everything from if you're a super high net worth family. And so how did you land on that practice area? I know I kind of got the sense that you were pretty much done litigating. The litigation experience probably gave you a lot of really good context on how to write these things because you saw what didn't work when you were litigating them in court one way or the other. But why did you choose family law for a bucket and specifically asset and estate planning, asset protection, estate planning?
Well, yeah, I ended up choosing trust is how I got into it. When I took the bar in Colorado, I made acquaintance with another out-of-state person taking the bar. And basically, one of the things in law is if you are a solo attorney and you can hook up where you got someone who can come in and run your practice if something goes wrong, incapacity, whatever, you have someone who can come in and wind down the practice, they'll lower your rates for your malpractice insurance because you have someone who can step in. And this guy asked me to do that. And I said, sure. And I was still teaching at the time, but I said, sure, I'll do that. Lower rates, whatever. I'm a business guy. I get that. More to pay yourself, more to pay your staff, those kind of things. Right. And he ended up, I was out working in the yard one day, and I got a call. This was Friday afternoon. I was putting a sprinkler system, and I got a call that he had a heart attack. And so on Monday, I went and put on my suit that still fit, kind of, and I appeared in 3 criminal courts and got continuances. So I went from, I guess, sprinkler boy or lawn boy to lawyer in 48 hours. And that pulled me back in. I was always an attorney. I was still an attorney, but I was still trying to finish up the school thing. And so the only thing I had going for me in that courtroom, Chris, was I had the best tan of anybody in there because I'd been outside all summer.
It doesn't hurt. And you had a beard. You had the nice beard, probably.
And I told my story. I said, "Hey, I'm here. I just stepped into my Colorado law license today, and I'm asking for continuance, Your Honor." And so this guy actually brought me on and got me back in the game. And he was a Second Amendment attorney. So, a lot of guns, a lot of gun rights. Can we get gun rights to people who shouldn't have gun rights, those kind of things. And I just there's a little bit of litigation going and saying, yeah, this person, Your Honor, needs a gun. We don't care how crazy he is or whatever. Just wasn't sitting really well with me. I believe in gun rights and all those kind of things. But, up in Wyoming, gun rights or gun control was basically using both hands. That's what that meant.
Right.
Down in Colorado, it was a little different. So I kind of decided that it'd be really cool if I'm going to be in the Second Amendment stuff to do gun trusts. So I started doing gun trusts. I
never even heard of a gun trust, so I'm excited to learn. What is that?
It's kind of an anti-confiscation device, if you will.
Okay.
You do something wrong, you get drunk with your open carry, and you get drunk, you're supposed to lose all your gun rights. Well, you turn them into the sheriff, you clear your name, you ain't getting those guns back. But if you have it in a gun trust, you can symbolically turn over your safe key to your successor trustee, usually your spouse, and you've effectively turned over the possession of all your firearms. So even if you don't get cleared, at least you didn't lose all the firearms, and they can be used to take care of your family and whatnot. So if you think of it that way as a possession protection type of thing, right, keeping it from, that was asset protection right there within a gun trust. It was a specific type of asset, guns and firearms and NFA items and those kind of things, suppressors and those kind of things. But it protected those from confiscation and getting people accidental felonies, because if you had a suppressor, you can make that person a trustee or a lifetime beneficiary of your trust for the day. Let them take the suppressor. They could go up and do whatever they needed to do, and you didn't have to be around there, and you weren't breaking the rules for transferring possession. So that's how I got into it. And then from there, it was, let's do trust for a living. And that kind of went to estate planning for fundamental estate plans, which helps everybody avoid probate and those kind of things, to when you die, you can have asset protection, because when you die, the trust turns from being not protected to protected. We call that revocable to irrevocable. And then it kind of graduated from that, was like, hey, Wyoming has a trust where you can start out where it's irrevocable, and you're protected, and you don't have to die, which is kind of a plus if you think about it.
Right. Yeah. So I want to use the segue from the gun trust thing, which was an interesting one, because the term that came up, I think, is the overarching theme that I was excited to kind of get your opinion on and your experience around. So confiscation, as it sits, right? So when we talk about wealth matters and we talk about building wealth, we talk about all that. Most people think about the build or the run up or whatever they think about, right? The ROI and that. And anyone who's managed money, understands that risk is best quantified, by basically just not losing. Let's not losing money, right? In other words, like your level of risk is: are we gonna at least preserve our principal, and then are we gonna offset whatever the hurdle rate is that we're trying to meet? But there's a lot of ways to lose it, right? You could obviously make a bad investment. You could be over-indexed into one asset class, and you can do all those things. But the more common way that people lose wealth is poor planning, things outside of their control. An accident that wasn't foreseen by a teenager that didn't do anything on purpose, but was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And then you get sued. Like, there's all these other things. And then you live in an environment today where, again, without it being about a political thing, it's just, we move into a world where we're seeing more and more confiscatory type actions, right, being propagated, whether it be this resurgence every 30, 40 years of socialism might be a good idea, despite it's never worked, or whatever it may be. So I really wanted to talk to you about this concept of confiscation. Wyoming is a very unique thing because, as a state, for those who do or don't know, property rights has always been kind of what their number one thing has been. The cowboy way has always been about property rights of all forms. And they were the first to kind of do that with Bitcoin on the front end. They were the first to give women the right to vote. Most people don't realize that. And so whether it's a right to vote, or whether it's a gun in a trust, or whether it's, a digital asset, property is the path to economic sovereignty or freedom, is kind of, I think, the way. And that's what the advisors in the audience of this, I think, are caring about. So I wanted to talk about your lens of, what is the risk level today versus maybe when you restarted 15 years ago, 20 years, whatever that was, 2013. So I guess 12 years ago. Have you seen the confiscation environment get worse, get better, stay the same? Have you seen people pay less attention to it, more attention to it? You've done 2,400 of these trusts in the last decade. So, talk to us a little bit about what you've learned and where you think it's heading.
Okay, well, I always look at it as the world, back then when I first started, seemed to be a lot more of an empowerment society, where we were kind of built to empower everybody. Everyone had a chance and things like that. And now it's moved, in my opinion, to a more entitlement society, where, yes, we want the property, but we don't want to make it, and we don't want to protect it. We want to take it from you. And, it's so keeping with the E theme, maybe we got empowerment, entitlement, now envy. If I can't have it, you can't have it either, type of thing. And that just seems to be the basis of a lot of lawsuits right now, which doesn't have anything to do with the actor or the person with the property. It's just they're in a wrong place at the wrong time. And so when we're talking with parents and things like that, who may just own a house or something right now, where they're not really concerned about asset protected for themselves, you need to start getting concerned if money comes to you either through inheritance or some other thing, because all of a sudden the bullseye on you gets a little bigger, and you're now you're now worth suing, and you weren't suing before. And that bullseye works for everybody. If you have a house and it's highly mortgaged, you got second loans and everything on it, no one's going to take it because they can't get to the money. They have to pay somebody first before they can take it. But the minute you get all that paid off, it's the same house. It may be worth less. Appreciation says it's worth more, but it's now 10, 20 years older. But now they want to take it because they're not paying someone else to get that. And that's the level. And that bullseye moves not only in the private world, but it also, to me, it moves in the government world as well. Take IRAs as an example, traditional investment retirement accounts. 5, 6 years ago, if you left an IRA to your child, that person would stretch those required minimum distributions out over their lifetime. That wasn't going to change your tax bracket. That, you know, no creditor was wanting to take those. Those may have been, you know, $10,000 a year or whatever that stretch out was, depending on your age and whatnot. Well, then government comes in and decides that they need us to pay those off quicker. So now if you leave it to your kids, it's a 10-year payout. Well, now it may be $100,000 a year instead of 10 a year. So now creditors are interested in that, and it does change your tax bracket and things like that. Keeping with the IRAs, so that's the federal side. Keeping with the IRA analogy, there are states that you went to bed one night knowing that your retirement IRA was for retirement purposes, and a creditor couldn't grab that until the state passed a law saying, well, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do means-based testing, and we're going to see your age and how much we think you need to live until you die, and anything above that in your IRA, creditors can now take. And this has happened to some people in states overnight. They went to sleep on December 31st, woke up on January 1st, and now what they weren't going to use for retirement could be taken away by a creditor, where it couldn't be taken away the time before. And to me, that's the biggest challenge, is making sure that you have that in your mind, that that's coming down the road. We can't stop it. So what do we do today to help protect that in the future? How do we try to get ahead of the curve? How do we try to guess what's going to happen and come down and get these in place?
So let me repackage that, summarize that, see if I heard and what I think I heard, and then correct me if I got any of it a little bit misconstrued. I heard a couple of forces in play, and then I heard you kind of talking about the dynamics that are shifting. So one of the forces in play is we have the largest wealth transfer in the history of humanity happening in real time right now as boomers age, Gen X is there, right? So most people listening to this obviously are aware of that, but they may or may not see themselves in a certain bracket of that wealth transfer until they listen to you just now, right? And what I mean by that is everybody defines wealthy or rich differently. For some people in certain states, that's $250,000 a year with $1 million in investable assets or whatever. For other people, it's like 20, 30 million because everything else feels like you're just middle class, right? With a bunch of expenses and people thinking that you have money. It doesn't matter though, right? The point is that this is really the first layer of your message is if you have assets at all, the two things that are happening in real time are we've moved into a quote envy from entitlement model in society. That's not a good force. The other force that's happened is appreciation through debasement or any other number of reasons, doesn't matter why. Assets are worth more, right? Everybody knows assets have appreciated. They're going to continue to appreciate because we're not going to stop printing money anytime soon. So as we think about that force, what it means is even if you owned your house in Fort Collins 20 years ago, well, now all of a sudden it's worth 3 times what it was 5 years ago. And so forever, you didn't think you were rich or special, right? You had this thing and it was $250,000. But then all of a sudden since 2020, now it's worth $750 because you're in a cool town and it's well now, like you said, no debt, you know, nobody between the money and you, it's worth taking because the legal bill's not going to be $750 or $500 or whatever. And so if I don't think I'm rich or wealthy, I don't think I need to protect my assets. If mom and dad are going to give me money and I don't know that about minimum distributions because I don't have an IRA or whatever, but they're going to do this inheritance thing, which is happening left and right. The minimum distributions going up all of a sudden, again, take it from a 5-figure thing not worth going after to 100,000. So if I have a student loan, if I have something where I'm defaulting or like something else that I think is harmless, all of a sudden now I have a risk I didn't know I even had. And so at a minimum, how do you start with those people? Like how do you educate them rapidly other than things like this? I mean, how do you educate them? How do they find themselves in a empowered position with the answers they need? What are the resources you recommend? What is the process you take them through? You know, how do they identify where they should be?
Well, the way you can identify where you should be is, you know, we go out and give a lot of presentations and things like that, just talking about estate planning, because, you know, 7 out of 10 people don't really have a plan. And I asked them,
is that the number? Is that your kind of personal experience? You've done 2,400 of these, but just curious, is that pretty?
It's a high 60%. They either don't have a plan or it hasn't been updated. You know, it'd be better not to have a plan because, you know, the
Yeah,
person.
I would imagine the unupdated plan is probably as big of a problem as not having one, right? Or maybe it's worse.
Well, it can be, in Wyoming and Colorado, if they're not named in your will, just because you married them after you wrote the will and had kids, the first thing the judge has to decide is, did you intentionally mean to disinherit them by not naming them? Which is, none of them do. They just didn't update the will. So, it's getting that message out that you may not think you have a plan, but you do, because if you die without a will, the government really cares who's going to pay the taxes the next go around. And so they have statutes that say how that property is going to go. So you either have whatever your state, name your state, that is your plan unless you go in and change it. And you're probably not going to like that plan at all, because it's written a long time ago, and families are more blended now. We're no longer the nuclear families that we were. So a lot of these things they don't make sense in today's world. And the minute you tell people about this, like, well, I got to come in and change that. So that's how we get them to come in, just to talk about changing it. Hey, do I want to avoid that whole court process of transferring my documents and everything else, that public court process? It takes time. And a lot of people say, hey, I want to keep the government out of my death. Let's just go ahead and have a plan. Well, then when you come in and talk to them, you start asking the questions about asset protection. And the way we usually ask those, Chris, is we just look at them and kind of look at how much money they have and how many kids they have. And we divide the two, right? And so if you have $1 million house that's going to be free and clear by the time you hope you die, of course, you don't get to pick when you die, but we look at the time now and the time when it's all paid for. Well, if you have $1 million home, and you have one child, you have an opportunity when you pass away to leave that money to that child in such a way that their creditors, the child's creditors, and the child's predators can't take that away from you. And, that's pretty powerful when you say, what you have is $1 million. Would you like to set up Johnny or Sally with a trust that they can go through the nastiest divorce you ever heard of? They can go through bankruptcy. They can run over the made-for-TV lawyer himself, but they can start their life over with that $1 million, because after they take everything that Johnny or Sally owns, they still have that because they couldn't take that box. And when people start thinking about that, it's no longer, I got to have 15 million before I have a trust, or I got to do this or that. It's like, wow, it'd be really nice to set my kids up with that type of advantage. If you have two kids, now we're asking, is 500,000 enough? And if I think to myself, if my parents left me a $500,000 trust that no one could touch, that I could invest in the stock market, and they could take my life and everything that I have in it, but I could start my life over with that, or have my kids start their life over with that. To me, that's enough. I don't need the other either. So we kind of have those conversations and talk about those, and
I feel like
enter into that asset protection.
Yeah, I want to ask a clarifying question here, because as I listen to you, I feel like sometimes the catalyst might be the giver, or in other words, maybe so now let's go to adult children. Let's say they're a Gen X kid, or an elder millennial. They're in 40 to 50 years old. They're going to ultimately be the beneficiary. Mom and dad are in their 70s right now, let's just say, right? So, and whatever that house is, we use $1 million, it's round numbers. Doesn't matter. It could be $500,000, whatever. The point is that when you're on that side of it, more often than not, whoever you're going to give that stuff to, right? Whatever you spent your whole life working for, paying off, and accruing, there's an accomplishment in that for those who have gotten something to even give. In other words, from that side of the equation, doing it right is something that kind of feels like you completed your game, right? Like whatever that means to people. Is that the catalyst that usually calls and kicks off a conversation? Or is it usually the kid who goes, I'm worried because mom and dad aren't structured right? Or is it a blend of both, just depending on the family? Because I can see why having the conversation with either one of those, the beneficiary ultimately, or the grantor, the person who has the asset today, is kind of a path to the same end, but they have to be aligned.
Yeah. So it happens both ways. I mean, as you say, a big way is when the child gets a little older and they just took their parents through probate, and the court system and everything like that, and they come in and say, hey, is there some way I can avoid making my kids go through this?
Okay, so in other words, it happens to them, and then they go, okay, I don't want that to happen to my kids.
Right. But
So
then again,
yeah.
with the new generations coming up, and knowledge is doubling so much quicker than it used to, the kids and the parents don't always see eye to eye on financially.
Right.
And so when the parents come in, not only can they protect the kids from unseen events. I mean, a lot of the reason is like, I love the spouse that my child married, but I don't want them to get my money. Let their parents take care of them. I just want to take care of my child. Okay. I don't want a divorce to take that away and things like that. But other things are more nuanced. Like some parents are saying, I want to give a hand up instead of a hand out.
Right.
And so, poor Johnny's down in the basement playing Call of Duty. And that's his job. And so mom and dad come in and say, well, we're going to leave money to this kid because we're not going to discipline him now because we got to live with him. But, when we have a trust, what we wanted to do is we want Johnny to get his W-2 that he makes every quarter and take it to the trustee. And we're going to have the trustee match what Johnny made. So if Johnny wants to play Call of Duty all day and make nothing, that's easy. The trust pays nothing. If poor Johnny needs $10,000, you better go out and make $5,000 so you can get the 10. So, trusts have a lot of different purposes than to just protect assets. They can also help protect kids from themselves. And another big thing is they can help you during your incapacity where the assets have already been transferred to the trust, and now your successor trustee, who's like a successor manager or something like that for a business, can come in and manage your assets for your care. And that's a big thing. It doesn't matter who you are. Healthcare makes us kind of swaps the tables there. The ultra rich can afford to kind of fund their own healthcare. You need about 4 or 5 million in the bank at 10% interest or whatever to pay for what this stuff costs. The poorer people can't, and so that it could really take it away and things like that. So the idea of having your kids be able to take care of you a little bit using your own money is really a good.
Now we're talking about the healthcare directive side of the trusts, right?
Well, and some of the asset protection, a lot of people think of those made for TV attorneys and those kind of things taking it, but they're asset protection. Our biggest creditor is the people we pay on April 15th. I guess
Right.
It's April 16th now because April 15th is a holiday in Washington D.C. But anyway, whatever. It always changes. So some of the taxes, if you can work the taxes, that's going to make your overall wealth a lot more as well. But it's also healthcare for the folks where, in some states you have to pay your assets down to $2,000 before you can get government assistance. Well, that's not hard to do at $10,000 a month for a lot of those care units. But, the idea that you want to leave something to your kids when you have to spend down to $2,000, just like you said, there's some ownership and some pride in making that money, and just to give it to a nursing home kind of makes people upset. So that's asset protection is a lot deeper than just I don't want so-and-so to sue me because I made a mistake. I want so-and-so not to take my money because I got sick and I found the one disease that Medicare won't pay for, Alzheimer's, dementia, whatever. Everything else will pay for. It could be cancer, whatever, but those two things we're not paying for those. So that some of it's just bad luck. And when you look at it that way, this stuff can happen all the time. And when you need to do it when the skies are clear. You need to start talking about asset protection when you don't have all these creditors coming after you, because it's like long-term health insurance. You can't get it when you're sitting in there in a skilled nursing facility. So
yeah, you said a couple things that I want to bounce around and just keep picking in on, so pick up. One is just the importance of a human element of this. So one of the things that we talk about both on the show as a recurring theme, but also in the newsletter, is that at least for the next, call it 2 decades, I think, despite all the advances we're going to have in AI and automation and things like that, which are inevitable, they're only going to compound. We'll never be able to keep up with the level of execution. But at the same time, there's this emotional component, especially when you talk about wealth transfer, estate planning, asset protection, any of those things, kids, right? Like, how do I incentivize Johnny, but not have him mad at me, but also not like, I don't want to enable bad behavior. I also don't want to argue with him right now. Like all that's really nuanced stuff. If you're just doing that on a website or LegalZoom or whatever, and you're buying your trust and will and you're buying it, that's not a negative, I wouldn't say, but it's also, you're not getting any of this nuance conversation. No one's asking you the questions. And even if it's a bot asking you, there's not the same level of comfort, at least in the Gen Xer type, older generation that grew up pre-digital, but also has embraced digital. I think there's just this element of human to human that advisors have that is going to be in style and maybe even grow over the next 15 years through this wealth transfer. How important do you think it is? Or are you more happy that they just get the answers they need, the education they need, and pick a medium, whether it's a online e-commerce solution for their trust and will, or whether it's working with you? Like, do you have a dog in that hunt other than the fact that you run a firm? I mean, or do you think that it's actually reckless to do it with just an online solution because there's too many boxes missed? I mean, what's your personal opinion on that, or professional opinion on that?
Well, my professional opinion is that there's a little more to it than just getting the trust. And there's a lot of ways you can get a trust. You can copy and paste. You can have AI write it. You can get these out of the box systems and things like that. But the trust, knowing how the trust works, that's the gold. Knowing how a trust is supposed to work, knowing that if we put in this clause, Johnny will be protected. If we put in this clause, this is what could happen. Knowing how to get a new advisor, or how to put in a trust protector to get a stuck trust unstuck, or how to use, what can happen and keep that from happening without going to court to fix the thing. To me, that's a journey, and that's the real value of working with an attorney who focuses. We're not allowed to say specializes. Who focuses on trust and things like that, knows what's going on, and how to avoid taxes. How do you keep your step up in basis so you can avoid a lot of capital gains when your kids try to sell the assets that you leave them? It's all those pieces together. And then it goes further than that. We pride my firm on, continuity and bringing in younger attorneys all the time who can take over, because we want to be there for the kids. I mean, it's one thing to explain it to mom and dad and have them write the trust, but then when something happens to mom and dad, how do you administer that trust? And so we try to put a face with the names so that the kids aren't worried about coming in and talking to us about how that works and things like that. And then when you get up into the higher level trust, where you're actually settling these asset protection trusts for yourself, mom and dad don't have to do it for me. They don't have to die. I can do it for myself, which is what makes those higher end trusts really,
So I want to shift to that. So on the low end, to summarize up, if I'm a family that either the potential future beneficiary and the parents who are aging and eventually maybe going to be moving on, if I've got assets of paid off house or a close to paid off house and an IRA and a 401k and some other things that have been accumulated, and I don't have an actively managed and kind of compliant to my level of state trust, I should be looking for someone like you. If I'm in Colorado and Wyoming, they can go to yourtrustedplanner.com and they can find you, have a consult. But if they're in other states, they should find someone like you. That's kind of the $500,000 to call it $2 million net worth family between all their assets, house included. Now let's talk about the fun stuff, right? Because that's kind of table stakes. That's important. That's available. It's the best money they could spend for peace of mind as well as for kind of continuity. Now let's talk about the family that's liquid, 5 to 50, 5 to 100 million and up. Now there's some other architectures that where the target's not only bigger, as you said earlier, there's multiple targets. They're public, private, peer-to-peer. In other words, like they're and in some cases international, or even business to business. Like there's a lot of angles of attack when you are in that high net worth or ultra high net worth class. And Wyoming's got a unique, there's several states that have something similar, not a lot, but there's a handful. But Wyoming, which is kind of your bread and butter, is unique and one of the best, probably legacy ones for self-settled or delegated asset protection trusts. What the heck is that, number one? We're going to put a graphic and a diagram in the show notes that is kind of proprietary to you that will help give people a visual as you talk through it. But what is that? What is it? First of all, what is it, and why is it different than some other kind of family trust that might be for a high net worth family?
Okay, well, that's just to finish the thought. There's a lot of irrevocable trusts out there. That's where you get the asset protection, is once the grantor dies. So the grantor is the attorney word for the person who writes the trust. Okay. It's typically the client who comes in and says, I want this. They can write it for the benefit of their kids, but they come in and say, I want this trust. And then a trust has three parties. It has that grantor, then it has the trustee, which is the fancy attorney word for the person who manages the trust, following the grantor's rules. They have a fiduciary duty to follow those rules, and they follow those rules on behalf of the beneficiary. So you have those three things in there. And typically in most states, if you are the grantor and you are the trustee and you are the beneficiary, or all three of those, it's a contract between those three people. So it's a contract between me, myself, and I. Basically, and you're just agreeing with yourself that you can take money out of your own trust and do things, and that's what makes it a revocable trust, because you can change it anytime you want. You can get rid of it. You can do a whole bunch of things. But then, in most states, when the grantor dies, I gotta make sure I keep the right fingers up. But when the grantor dies and you only have the two other, that's when it becomes irrevocable, and that's when the trust gets what we call asset protection. Why? Because now you have to have the trustee's permission, which is no longer the grantor, because the grantor is gone. You now have to have the trustee's permission to take things in and out of a trust. Think of it as a coffee cup. As long as the top's off the coffee cup, you can do whatever you want with that coffee. You can throw it on your friends. You can spill it in your lap and sue the vendor that gave it to you, because we are a entitlement society. Or you can, even though it was your fault, or you can put a top on there and keep that stuff in there and only spill it when you get permission to take the top off. That's what an irrevocable trust is, and that's the way to think about it. But in these other states that have these self-settled spendthrift trust, spendthrift means the idea is to keep you from spending, or better yet, keeping your creditors from spending your money. But it's a self-settled. This means you can be the grantor, you can be the beneficiary, you just need a separate trustee, okay? But you don't have to die to get that trustee going. You can be both the grantor and the beneficiary. You still need three to agree, but it's a lot different than when you're the grantor and the kids are the beneficiary with the trustee than when you're the grantor and you're the beneficiary. Right. So basically, you can get the money out, you can put the money in. You can't use it like a checking account, okay? But you can do this in and out. And then the value of working with an attorney who knows about these things is that they can tell you about the formalities of how to keep that trust compliant, so that the made-for-TV attorneys don't come in and say, Your Honor, they're not following the rules. Why should we? And if I can give you a really quick analogy, a lot of people for asset protection will open up limited liability companies. Mm-hmm. And they'll make these limited liability companies, and sometimes your CPA or your financial advisor, somebody will write these things for you, because they're like $50 on the Secretary of State. You can open $100, whatever. You got a limited liability company, and it's like, wow, no one's ever going to be able to take your money away. Well, in Colorado, a single member limited liability company doesn't work. Has no protection. Something they're not going to tell you.
In most states, I think that's the case, or at least most of the states that people care about or live in and do business in. Most states.
Yeah, there's two theories behind that, and it's called a charging order. We won't get into all that, but the idea that the court looks at is like, we want to use this law to protect the innocent partner, and that's why we have it, so that the creditor can't come in and nab the partner's assets who's not responsible.
Right.
And if you're just the only partner, it doesn't fly in those states, because we're not protecting anybody. But in the other states, like Wyoming is one of them, it's a single member LLC, limited liability company, gets that same type of protection as a dual member or multi-member will in other states. So that's the idea. But again, in a lot of states, if you're not watching the formalities, are you doing resolutions? Are you filing your annual reports? Are you, you know, do you have an operating agreement? Are you following it? Do you go on your yearly meetings and do that? You know, there's all these things in here that a made-for-TV attorney will pick at, and if you're not following any of them, then why should you get asset protection? Actually, it's limited liability, right? They can take what's in there, but whatnot. So that's the idea that, you know, a lot of people are just throwing money and they have all these LLCs, but no one's told them how they work, so they're at risk. Same thing with a trust. If you can have a trust,
if they're doing things, and again, just back and forth, you know, if they're doing things like in multiple states, like let's say they live in one state, California, for instance, and they go do a Delaware LLC, or they go do a Wyoming one, or they go do, like, in other words, they've heard something, they've read something, their tax person or their favorite YouTuber told them to do something. Or they have a self-directed IRA and they set it up with someone, Equity Trust Co. or whatever, and then they kind of use their own LLC to, you know, do that. If they do it halfway, they might be, meaning legal, like in other words, they might be able to get it live and operate it, but there's a vector of piercing is the term, I believe, piercing the veil. There's a vector that's wide open that they didn't know about and that they didn't manage to. And it could be as simple as where the nexus is considered. Oh, it's a Wyoming LLC, but you actually are the single member and you live in California. It's got a nexus there. Or you bought a truck and wrote it off as an IRS 179 deduction, but that truck isn't registered in Wyoming because that's not where you live. It's registered in this state. And so now you have a nexus there, but you haven't filed that, right? Like, all those things are what you're talking about, right? Where there's no one kind of at the wheel, keeping it compliant, keeping it up to date, and actually keeping it in the purpose it was designed to be, which was to protect or create a harder way to get to my assets.
Right. Or it's a misconception that you hear about the LLC, Asset Protection Trust, as being a great idea. So you set it up for your rental property in New York. And the rental property's in New York. And, you know, you got it owned by a Wyoming LLC, which is owned by a domestic asset protection trust. Everything's good. I mean, it's probably asset protected, but the New York court, you're going to lose there because the place is in New York and they don't care. Matter of fact, they have laws that say they shouldn't have to care because it is in New York and they don't care what Wyoming does. And so you're going to get a judgment there. You know, and whether or not they can collect that judgment from your LLC and things like that is what now matters, because they're going to get the judgment, you know. And if you don't have everything set up right, the New York court's going to say, pay the man. Right?
So
Wyoming court may say something different, but unless you know that you don't have any way to negotiate, you don't have any way to kind of force the person to settle. And, you know, we get settlements all the time. The more complex you have all these things, the more people are going to settle because they don't want to spend all the money to break through all the walls to get to the prize. And we consider settlement asset protection as well, because you're settling for something less than they could have taken. But that's the idea, is that you may have good intentions. You may have read all the literature. You may have looked at, you may have all the AI bots tell you that this is the way to do it. But you're initially probably going to lose because it is that state's property, and that judge isn't going to bone up on Wyoming law to during that hearing.
So that's a statement that especially the higher net worth listener and or their advisors are more familiar with maybe than the lower net worth but millionaire person who's listening to this, which is judgment proof. My layman's version of that is judgment proof doesn't mean you didn't get a judgment. It means that it's basically uncollectible because of the way you've structured yourself. But put it in your vernacular so that it's accurate for the listener. Like, what is the value of being judgment proof? And then there's people that have probably invested significant money building all these complex structures, whether it's Cook Islands or whatever. What's your thought on that, and when that's right, or why that's also just another waste of time and money if you were to really be able to say, look, if you are a U.S. citizen or if you have assets in the U.S., here's why, Wyoming. Like, why would Wyoming be better than Alaska or be better than Hawaii or South Dakota, which are the 4 I'm aware of that do something similar to this, if I have U.S. assets? And why is it better than Cook Islands if I want to be judgment proof?
A lot of questions there, Chris, but
I know. Well, I want a lot of answers. That's why.
Judgment proof is just basically you're not worth going after. Okay, so you're going to your bankruptcy hearing. You run over somebody on the sidewalk on the way to your bankruptcy hearing. You got no insurance. You're in the middle of a bankruptcy hearing. Yeah, they can sue you. Yeah, they can go pay an attorney. Yeah, they can win. And maybe you can extend the bankruptcy long enough that you can put that judgment on your matrix and get rid of that too. Houses are really good, personal residences. If you have a lot of secured loans on those, and those are like a mortgage or, it's recorded that this person is in the first position. So if this house sells for anything, it goes to this person. If you got a lot of that on your home and you're in a state that has a homestead allowance, an additional amount above that, your home may only be worth $50,000, $100,000 after you pay those 2 things off. Again, you hurt somebody. Maybe you have insurance for this one, and insurance limits are $75,000. You got a $100,000 deal, so you got $25,000 over. Are you going to go after this person, pay an attorney to foreclose on the home, sell it, pay a realtor, all that, and then pay the bank off, pay the homestead allowance, and then collect the $25,000? Probably not. So judgment proof just means you're not worth someone's time. It doesn't mean they can't get a judgment against you. It just means it doesn't pay anybody. So that's the idea. When you extend that up to levels and things like that, you always got to keep that in mind, that these other schemes, going offshore, going to Wyoming, going to these other places where you can either have a domestic asset protection trust or an offshore asset protection trust, that kind of give you an idea of the differences in the name there. You got to know everything that goes into that. They all have protections. They all have their pluses. But if you're offshore and you have no money and the judge puts you in contempt of court until you pay it, you may want to call your foreign trustee and say, you need to send me some money so I can get out of jail. And they're going to say, I'm going to ask a policy, whatever. It's not coming. That was terrible accent. I don't even know where that was.
I thought that was like a bit like Swiss and something I'd never heard before. I didn't know what that was, but it was good.
I was trying to do Cook and Jersey Islands with a little bit of
Cook and Jersey Island all at the same time.
A little bit of BVIs or something thrown in there. But anyway, I better stick to Wyoming. So those, that's the thing is, I really don't care what people end up doing, as long as they make the choice with their eyes wide open. And the only way that they can make their choice with their eyes wide open is if I take the time and explain the risk to them. And, and I go pretty off the deep end when I'm talking about risk and things, because I just want to exaggerate what can happen so that when they say, hey, I want to put 15 grand down on a Wyoming trust, I want to go put 45 grand down on a overseas trust or whatever, they know what can happen and they know what's there. And the idea is you're just trying to make it a little less accessible. Okay. Right. There is asset protection, but a good person, if somebody comes after you, if you're defrauding like a government or something like that, and they want to make a point, they're going to be able to break down a lot of things. So if you think of asset protection as putting your money in the middle of a house with a lot of rooms, and people have to knock down doors and run through walls to get to that. If you have someone who's prints money, for example,
right,
they're probably going to get to the middle. So it's a little bit of misnomer, but it's the asset protection. But for most things, if you understand the risk, most things, it's pretty solid, and it really helps.
Well, and I think, again, I think it's an important distinction, just the current news feed that has us think everybody's running a childless daycare somewhere, and printing money. When you take away that, the majority of folks listening to this that have earned and kept their money, the advisors advising them, like they've done it right. They've built whatever they've built over decades or however long. They've had wealth events, and they have a succession plan that is whatever they feel like designed for their legacy and their family in a way that is meaningful to them. And they just don't want something easy to interrupt it, siphon it, confiscate a big portion of it. In other words, they want to lock the door, and then they want to have 4 or 5 more doors that somebody has to run through and get tired before they get to the gold in the center of the Tootsie Roll, right? So all those mixed metaphors aside, I think for the majority of folks that are high net worth or ultra high net worth, you're just talking about pragmatism and, kind of self-insuring in many ways, that you've created a line of defense that's multifaceted. Cyber risk. There's so many new risks that could attack you, meaning like somebody could send a text as a teenager to their boyfriend or girlfriend that you and I couldn't send because we didn't have the ability to take photos at 4K and send them across the planet in seconds and then regret it, right? But if a 15-year-old does that today, they could be called a pedophile. There's so many things that, like, now one screw up that was arguably even maybe just a bonehead teenage decision. Not like you said, when you're working with kids, trying to help them before they hit 18, make dumb decisions. Like the risk vector for that in the best families is just higher.
Right.
And so any one of those things could create a open wound that just allows somebody to run right at the center of that house to thing. And so this design is very pragmatic and something that you help them think through and then execute. So
the other thing, just Chris, just stop you there, because I think that the other thing to know that makes us a little different from the offshore, that's the word I was looking for, offshore, overseas. Yeah. Offshore, onshore, offshore, makes the Wyoming a little different is that we have a way when designing that trust to remember you have the three, the grantor, the trustee, and the beneficiaries. We have a way in Wyoming to design it in such a way where the trustees' duties get separated. And why that's important is that the grantor client can do most of the trustee duties. So they can invest what they want. They can direct the investments. They can have what are assets. They're not working with a trustee with assets under management. I mean, their financial advisor can be part of that trustee thing. They don't even really need to move their money or anything. And what we do is we pull off what we call a distribution committee. We just allow the trustee duties to be split, where we have someone just approve when the grantor asks for money out of the trust. So I think that's an important distinction, because we do have the ability to write these in such a way that the client can retain a lot of the trustee duties. And if he gets mad at the distribution committee, the client can fire that person as well. So I think that's the distinction that you don't get with offshore type of
and
trust.
also with other states, right, that do similar structures, but maybe in a different way, where they don't separate the trustees' duties, right? So that's one of the advantages of Wyoming.
Correct. Yeah, we basically set you up a trustee company with Wyoming roots, so that you are a Wyoming trustee.
Well, and there's a staff, and there's an office, and there's a lease, and there's these things that are legitimate, that are not just a PO box inside of a high-rise tower in Wilmington, Delaware, or whatever.
Yeah, have you seen those when you go to those trust places? It's usually one room with index cards around.
Yeah, it looks like a Dewey Decimal. It looks like a Dewey
with different names on it. It's like, oh, this is where these people have a desk space. Oh, here's where these people have desk space.
Yeah, not exactly audit proof if somebody ever showed up and knocked on the door.
Yeah, but they're not subject to U.S. jurisdiction either, so
Yeah, but like you said, if they want you bad enough, when you get to that level, it doesn't matter what you do. They're gonna take the roof off and drop a drone down, and you're done. But most people are not worried about that. They're trying to mitigate the things that they can't control, but that are more common, or that they could at least allow them to sleep at night, right? And when we think about things like that just add complexity, right? Whether it be private keys, multi-sig wallets, which if the people listening to this, 99% of them still don't own Bitcoin direct, and they only have exposure through an ETF, or maybe they're going to be in Fidelity when the 401k thing gets turned on. Okay, fine. But at some point, when you understand it, you're going to want to own some, because you're going to understand that owning some is the ultimate permissionless money that you can have in the world. And you can walk across a border without having to lug, a brick of gold and get stopped by TSA. But that also requires seed phrases and self-custody wallets or multi-sig wallets. And so now you're layering all these other things, which we educate and inform people about. But again, does the trust understand that? Was it updated with that? I can tell you flat out, as much as my wife knows about crypto and as much as I've written it down, there's nobody's spouse who isn't the primary Bitcoin person or whatever they may be that knows what the hell they're going to do if somebody dies and all they see is a seed phrase, and they have a bunch of different wallet addresses and Coinbase, and they're going to freak out and panic. And again, courts are going to, Gavin Newsom, everybody's favorite governor, is trying to get a law passed in California where if the wallet has been dormant for 3 years, the state can confiscate it. Which means if you're holding Bitcoin, which is the whole point, and you're going to leave it in a wallet and not touch it for the next 15 years because your long-term inevitability is saying it doesn't go to zero, well, then 3 years from now, technically, there's one state that's trying to pass a law. Whether it passes or not, it's not the point. The fact that the idea is out there.
Yeah, and what happens in California does not stay in California, unfortunately.
Yeah. So what other things have we not covered that you think are important? Kids protection plans, things like that. Talk to us about that, like minor children. How's that different than like the adult kid that's playing Call of Duty that we want to incentivize later, right? Talk to us about, I have 2 young kids. I have a teenager and I have, 2 toddlers. So, put me as the persona. What is the risk there?
So the biggest risk is when you have toddlers and whatnot, or people under the age of 18, and you head out with the spouse on date night, and the pickle truck comes around the corner way too fast and takes you out. If you don't have a guardian appointed, that's going to be a court process to get that guardian appointed, and that kind of depends on how your state's set up, whether next of kin automatically move in, or a lot of states, because of women's reproductive rights, have gotten rid of next of kin, so then you don't have anyone who can take over. And the problem with that is the minor children cannot stay with a minor babysitter or even a relative who's not been appointed until the permanent guardian gets appointed. So you're looking maybe at Child Protective Services or foster care or something, where those kids go in there until something can be done. And we have some products that we work with young adults where we can keep that from happening and make those things less of a problem. The other above 18, when your child turns 18, I remember when I took my son in and he was still 17, the doctor would talk to me like I was in charge. And then, a few weeks later, he turned 18 and they wouldn't even talk to me, right? Because he's now an adult. Right, an 18-year-old adult. Here's the money. Spend it how you think is wise, son, because you're now 18. And you cannot. Now
that the switch went on and you became instantly wiser.
Yeah. Let's forget that science says that your brain doesn't quit growing until you're 25. Hey, here's the money, go for it. Right. We need to have powers of attorney in place to make decisions for that person, because you can't make it for them anymore, even though you could when when they were younger. And it's important for not only healthcare decisions, but also the financial decisions, because if that young person is in college and they go into a coma or something like that, you cannot disenroll them from college without a power of attorney. So, your 529 or whatever is getting drained while the person's sitting in the coma. It's things we don't think about, but it happens. And we had it happen to a 42-year-old who didn't have one of these in place. And under the rules of our jurisdiction anyway, the doctor's supposed to get everyone who's interested in that person over the age of 18 come into a room and vote on who's going to make the medical decisions. And the mother of this young lady got outvoted. Oh. And so the boss became the person making the medical.
So this one obviously hits home for me and probably a lot of the audience that may or may not have, listened to something else and resonated with it. I guess, so let me understand this. Let's say I've got the majority of my assets, call it my net worth, and I'm saying this as an extreme use case, is I don't have a lot, right? Meaning, like, let's say that I'm listening to this and I don't even have a house without a lot of debt on it. I don't have a huge 401k, I'm building it or whatever, but I've got 3 kids under the age of 18, or I got 2 kids or 1 kid. It sounds like this is something I should do, even if I don't think I'm ready for the trust. This is a form of a trust, or this is a piece that I could execute right away to at least give myself the certainty, or my spouse the certainty, if God forbid something happened to both of us or whatever, outside of life insurance being there or whatever we may think is there, that there's a directive that cannot be overridden as easily or harder to override, that says our kids can stay together and they're going to go somewhere that we want, not somewhere that some random bureaucrat thinks is okay. Is that something that people could do separately? In other words, can they do a kids protection plan separate from a trust? Is it part of a trust, like a rider? How does it work, like the tactical?
Well, we can do those separate, okay? And the reason we can do them separate is a trust is like that cup or that box, and it only affects what you put in it, okay? Which is a whole different podcast, funding, putting things in the trust. But that's all it affects, and it affects it during your incapacity, and it affects it during your death, okay? If you don't have it in the box, then the will would take over on your death, but during your incapacity, it's the power of attorneys that take care of that. So the trust is the financial piece, the will is the financial piece. We need a financial power of attorney for either the will or the trust, just in case you didn't put the things in the trust or you don't have a trust. The healthcare stuff that you mentioned, the kids protection plan, those are all needed even if you don't have anything, right? There's nothing worse than having your child in the hospital, but they haven't signed a HIPAA release and you can't get the information on them. A child over 18. You just can't get any information. So those things need to be put in place. And typically those can be done. We like using attorneys to do that, but the state, it's such a problem in most states that there's statutory forms and things like that you can get put together and things for that to do those. Our kids protection plans that we do, they work because the way we do them, they work pretty much across the nation because we thought it was important. I mean, I gave up litigating to keep people out of jail. I think families are important. And then you can have a will that turns into a trust if you want. My point is, why have a will that makes a trust? Why have to go through probate to make a trust when you can just start with a trust and not go through probate? But you can have a will to go through a trust, and it could be as simple as, hey, if my child is under 30, because I don't think they're old enough to do it, I want so-and-so to manage their money until they get there. Now you have a place to drop the life insurance and that kind of thing, so they're not just grabbing it at 18 and and then all their buddies. See, wills are public, so you can go down and read them in the courthouse, so you can find out who got what, and then you can help advise them. You can call them up and say, "Hey, just saw you got $100 grand. Would you like to buy a Ferrari?"
I actually didn't know that. Doesn't surprise me because of all the stuff that is public. I didn't realize that wills are public. That just seems like a fishing pool for opportunistic attackers.
Yeah, I mean,
look what Johnny just got. I think I'm gonna go, whatever, meet him on Tinder and create an issue.
We've had people call up and say, hey, this creditor is calling me for the first time in 3 years. What do you think's going on? And it's like, well, someone close to you die? Mm-hmm. Did they have a will? Mm-hmm. Were you in the will? Mm-hmm. Okay. They're down in the courthouse reading it, and they now know you have money. Did it say how much money you got? Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, they're probably reading it, and they want you to pay them. So
are you saying, because I'm not sure if you are or not, and I've had this question so many times, and I are you saying that there's a specific and valuable reason to have a will for everybody, and there's a specific and valuable reason to have a trust, so both are good? Or are you saying you could skip the will altogether and just have a trust? And I'm asking that not as a leading question. I'm actually not sure.
No, that's a great question. So yeah, in our thing, in our trust package, we do have a simple will in there, and it's called a pour over will, POUR. And what it's supposed to do is, if we didn't get everything in the trust, we forgot to retitle something in the name of the trust, it will take that item and pour it into the trust. So if the trust has asset protection, that item will go in to the trust.
So this is a good, okay, now you, so
So it's a safety net.
I want it so that if I wasn't up to date, like even if I'm the most rigorous, like let's say that you and I were managing, my wife and I's, trust or whatever, and every Friday we get together and, we said, hey, we acquired these stocks and these things and we need to put them in. And so every Friday, which no one does this, by the way, but if every Friday we did this thing and the trust was that up to date, but I died on a Thursday, and I bought NVIDIA, right, or whatever, before it went to the moon, right? Then the pour over would make sure that anything that wasn't captured in the last update, whenever it was, landed where the other stuff was. So
Yeah,
that's what I wanted.
Yeah, that's a good example. I mean, but what we try to do is put that brokerage account in the name of the trust so it update automatically. But you got the concept there.
Well,
I
but
go out and buy a Tesla.
They bought crypto on Coinbase. Maybe they finally came around and they're like, I'm going to go set up a Coinbase account in my name, which means my RIA, my advisor, my CFP. They don't even know I did it. And I went out and I just bought 10 grand worth of Bitcoin. And now, pour over will make sure that my assets, regardless of where they were, pour over into the trust that I've been updating. And then anything else that was properly set up, like my retirement accounts, like my brokerage account, it's managed by my fiduciary, whatever, those things are already there. And so those can trade assets left and right, doesn't matter. But if I had a wallet or I had something that I forgot to update or I left out for any number of reasons, the pour over makes sure that it doesn't go through the probate process.
Well, it will still go through probate because it's a will, and where there's a will, you have to go through probate. So
okay.
The reason why we're so kind of trying to get you to put everything in a trust is you probably got the trust to avoid probate. So we want to make sure that happens. And there's thresholds where it's a less of a probate hassle to move certain amounts than it is to move a lot of amounts where it gets expensive and all those kind of things. So having a trust in some jurisdictions lowers the cost, because probate is a percentage of your estate and a trust doesn't have to go through probate. But to get back to the other question is why having a will is better than not having a will. If sometimes the statutes say if you don't have any children but you're married, and if you die, your estate gets split some way between your parents and your spouse. Well, if the only asset is your house, now your spouse and his or her in-laws
have to buy
co-owners of the house. I mean,
somebody's got to buy somebody out. Somebody's got to take a loan they may or may not want. Now the asset has to be sold. Maybe it didn't want to be.
Yeah, is that taking care of your spouse by making he or she sell it the first thing?
Or is it, even if, like you said, even if there's a functioning, and let's just call it a good relationship between the in-laws and the spouse, or the in-laws and their child, maybe it's the other way. It doesn't matter. When money enters the mix in any kind of way, shape, or form, whatever was good about it, sometimes and more often than not, breaks down for any number of reasons.
Absolutely.
Right. So the gloves come off when money's involved, no matter how little or small. And this is another way to kind of try and prevent the preventable, is what it sounds like. But thank you. That clarified. Now I understand the value of a pour over will, what it functions as, why you'd want both. Again, the key is to really do the trust thing, set that up right. The power of attorney around the kids, 50 states wide, has to be done and executed by whatever statutes in your state, I'm assuming that you're a resident of. But the language is probably pretty close nationwide, it sounds like. So I'd get with you and understand how to implement that. If I had children under the age of 18 and I wasn't sure what to do, that'd be a good place to start, because that's the one that to me is like, even if you don't have a lot of assets or you're like, oh, I'm rebuilding right now, if you have kids, none of us want our the decision around our kids being left to people that aren't in the family, or having those people in court trying to fight for the right to be making that decision.
Right. Or two in-laws that think they can do it better than the other. And,
Yeah. Yeah, or if a lot of co-parenting situations where, you know, the husband and wife are no longer together for any number of reasons, legally separated, divorced, but they're great co-parents now. But now you have other spouses or a boyfriend-girlfriend situation, and then something happens, and now whatever that custody agreement that was functioning, now there's somebody with an opinion that.
Yeah, and that's why we do what we do, Chris. That's what right there. That's why we do what we do, because you need to know. It's, in our opinion, you need to know, because most people don't know about the kids thing and the disability and the powers of attorney. So we feel people need to know that, and then they can make any choice from there on with their eyes wide open. But they at least need to know that, because it's a solvable problem, and they can take care of it right away. But like I said, most people don't know this. It comes as a shock, and we're not talking $1 million family. We're talking people with just kids, and they need to know these things. So that's why we do it.
When I think about, you know, the kids one's very timely for me, but just in general, like I think about peers that I have, and just nobody even knowing this is a thing, which is why I'm glad we're finishing with this topic. You know, but the kids protection piece, I didn't, you know, not even knowing this is a thing, right? Like most people think about, oh, I need to protect my assets or my retirement or this or that. But I'm good. My wife and I have talked about what we want to do, or my partner and I, if they're a same-sex couple, whatever it is, right? That my significant other and I that are raising these children have talked about it, and we have something papered. Okay, yeah, but that doesn't matter, because if you die, this is one set of things that's going to happen, and it's going to break down here or bog down here. Worse, and this seems to be worse to me, I lose my cognitive ability, but I don't die. Now the life insurance doesn't kick in, a bunch of other stuff doesn't kick in, and the bill just happened because not only is there a fight, but now there's legal costs to go defend that fight. And now you're dealing with the incapacitation, the grief around that, the fear, and the fact that the children, which are the only thing that anybody really probably cares about at the end of it all, are now in play. That's not fear-mongering. That's just like, that's a nightmare.
No, or the house is owned with joint tenants with right of survivorship, and you need to sell the house to pay for the hospital bills or pay for the care. But like you said, the person's incapacitated instead of dead, so the rights of survivorship don't kick in. So how does that person sign if they don't have the capacity? How do they sign to sell the house? And the answer is they can't without a power of attorney that they signed when they were competent. So even if you figured out I'm going to avoid probate by joint tenancy with rights of survivorship, it may not help you during incapacity. So it's those things that you have to think all the way through, and that's why we like helping people and having them come to people who have gone through this with other folks, just to explain what can happen. So again, you can make your decisions, you know, with the eyes wide open, knowing everything's going on.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground. I do think we have to have you back and do a thing on the mechanics of funding a trust and the distributions. I think that's a whole other dissertation you could probably give us. So we'll have to have you back for that on another episode of Atomic Level. But Matt Meuli, yourtrustedplanner.com, Wyoming Asset Protection Attorney.com. If you want to find them, LinkedIn, another place to find them. We'll put the contact information in the show notes. You do lunch and learns and webinars on this stuff for free all around the state of Colorado and Wyoming. You also do them online. Where else should they look at? Look you up if they have a immediate need to get a kids protection plan in place to talk about trust structures, maybe taking over something or even refreshing something that was done by somebody else 5 years ago. They moved states, they changed things. That's probably another way. Where's the best place to find you if we haven't mentioned it already?
Well, I think that number one place is yourtrustedplanner.com. We have a lot of the links there. We also have the links to the Wyoming stuff as well. So if you just remember one of those, that's what we have. Help a lot. We do have chat functions on our website at yourtrustedplanner.com where we can get back to you on that stuff. We don't have anybody live man it. We're not to that point yet, but
I know you're responsive, and we're watching some of the things you're doing, and they're pretty innovative on the operation.
Chris,
so we're excited about it. Thanks for the time today, Matt. I know everybody enjoyed it. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next time on the Atomic Level.
Thank you.